What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Powerhouse Mentality Podcast. I'm your host. I'm Caitlin Kenna Smith, and on today's episode, by the end of this episode, you're going to be able to understand how to avoid stress or emotional eating so that you can build a strong relationship with food and build good habits around food. Now, before we get into the topic and before I start listing out all of the things that you need to understand in order to build a good relationship with food and avoid that stress or emotional eating that so many of us deal with, I want to start off this conversation with a little bit of self-reflection on your end. So I'm going to ask you to either write these things down or just think through them in your head. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I really want you to be honest with yourself on and reflect with. So, number one, have you ever done or experienced some sort of stress or emotional eating? Now, I'm assuming because you're listening to this episode and you clicked on this episode that you probably do, or you probably have in the past. Or maybe there's somebody in your life who's very important to you that you love that does struggle with stress or emotional eating, and you want to be able to give them some insight and help them by listening to this episode. So if that's you, I appreciate that. 2, how often do you experience this stress or emotional eating? Is it something that happens on a daily basis? Is it a weekly thing? Is it a monthly thing? Does it happen like once a year? Now, 3, what kind of foods do you typically lean on or do you typically reach for when you're dealing with this emotional eating? And the final question, number 4, but the most important one, is do you know why you're experiencing the stress or emotional eating? Because today we're going to talk about some tactics that you can use to overcome and to avoid the stress eating, so you can develop good habits with food. But before we do that, you have to understand why this is happening. Because if you don't understand the why, then the what and the how aren't going to connect. So stress eating comes down to feeling a craving. But you don't just randomly have a craving pop up in your head where you can't stop and you can't avoid it and you can't have that discipline over it. So why does that happen and where does it come from? And that's why that last question, that do you know why you're experiencing this, was super important, because it goes into what we're going to talk about first. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is awareness, and having awareness to be able to understand why the emotional or the stress eating is happening. Because most of the time when we have one of these stress eating episodes, I bet you don't really think too much about it. You attribute it to being a little bit more hungry than usual, or you were just out of your routine, or maybe it was just a random occurrence. But the reality is, these things happen for a reason. They don't happen by accident. There's always going to be a trigger to emotional eating. So I want to drop a few examples for you, and maybe you can relate to one of these examples, or maybe you can't, but it'll help you better understand what I mean by what is that reason, what is that trigger. So example 1, someone who buys cookies or ice cream and needs to eat the entire carton or the entire package at once. Like, you can't just have one Oreo, or you can't just have one spoonful of ice cream. You kind of keep going back and going back and going back, almost with a sense of urgency to make sure that you get everything that you possibly can. And then it turns into a binge. And in that moment, you feel like you can't control yourself. And that could stem back to childhood. If you grew up in a big family when you had to almost fight for your food, like if your mom brought ice cream or cookies into the house, and if you wanted some, you had to be quick and jump on it, or everybody else in the house was going to get it first. So now you have that same relationship. It's not the same now. You don't have to fight for your food, but it has become a habit or a behavior that you've practiced your entire life that maybe you're not even aware of. Another example, and this one I feel like a lot of people can relate to, is maybe you find that you crave fast food after a long day of work, and usually it's because you're not necessarily hungry. You could eat the meal prep that you have at home or the dinner that you can make at home, but you find comfort in that food after a long, stressful day because during your childhood, after a hard day at school or when you did something really well, your parents said, hey, let's go get ice cream. Hey, let's go get McDonald's. And now it's a habit. So step one to avoid stress eating is to become aware of your emotions when it occurs and be able to identify that trigger that sets off that emotional eating. So once you identify this trigger, you can move on to replacing the habit of giving into emotional eating with something a little bit healthier, something that's going to serve you. But before I talk about that, I want to touch on how important it is to create space. Now, when that impulse or that craving or that trigger pops up, your goal in that moment should be to create as much space as possible between the impulse or the craving and the act of giving in or the act of eating the cookies or whatever. Cookies is one that's very common, so I'm using that as an example because I also fucking love cookies. So an example of this would be if you do crave those cookies, don't bring them into the house. Tell yourself that you can have them, but you have to go get them. Now, by the time you get dressed, you drive to the grocery store, you get them, that impulse may have passed, and then you have the ability to start to realize that you don't need those things. If you're door dashing something, create a 2 to 3 hour window from now until when that delivery comes. That way, you are giving yourself space and time to realize that you don't need that trigger or that emotional eating. Usually, cravings or these impulses are strictly emotion-based. So if we allow ourselves to let that emotion pass, or if we allow ourselves to process that emotion, then the craving will also pass. And then you're able to overcome an episode of when you would typically stress eat because you didn't give yourself enough space and you just jumped into it. Another example could be every time that you crave this, whatever that is for you, you can have it, right? Just like what I said earlier with the cookies, but you have to do 20 push-ups or you have to do 20 burpees or you have to go on a 10-minute walk. If you do those things, then you can have it. But the reality is that most people, they'll either not want to do those things. Most people don't want to do burpees. Or you do the act and then you've created that space and you realize, hey, I don't need that. I was just emotional in that moment and I'm going to go have a good, healthy meal that's going to allow me to get closer to whatever my goal is. All right, now that you've created space, let's talk about the mindfulness. Now, this part is going to help you break the cycle of stress eating. So when you feel the urge to eat due to stress or whatever negative emotion comes up, right, when you feel that trigger coming on, you have to take a second, you have to pause, take a deep breath, and take the awareness that you've built and identify what's really going on. And in this moment, you can find alternative activities that can help you cope with those emotions that are actually going to serve you and help you, such as meditation, walking, reading, journaling. It's going to be different for each and every one of you because each and every one of you are different people and you're going to get different things from these different activities. So pick something that allows you to be more mindful in your life and that fills your cup. So by interrupting the cycle and replacing that stress eating with a healthier behavior, you're going to gradually be able to rewire your habits and you're going to feel a hell of a lot better because of it. Now, that's all of the behaviors and the habit side of things, which is the most important thing because our habits and our behaviors that we take action on today are going to build who we are tomorrow. So the action that you take today creates the outcome of tomorrow. So if you stress eat today, most likely you're not going to be closer to your goals tomorrow if your goal is to lose body fat, gain muscle, or just feel more confident about yourself. If you continue to give in to stress eating, then you feel as though you don't have control. And when you feel as though you don't have control, it's going to impact all of these other areas of your life. Now, there's nothing more powerful than you being able to take control of stress eating if that's something that's held you back for so long. Because when you realize that you do have power over this food, then it's going to empower you in all other ways in life. So those are some of the habits and behaviors. But there are some nutritional tactics that you can use, meaning you can use the food that you eat and the habits that you have around your nutrition to help you reduce the urge to stress eat. So cravings are likely to come up when you're more hungry, or if it's been a really long time since you've had a good meal. It's kind of like we've all heard the Snickers commercial or seen it, or maybe I'm just dating myself, 90s kids. But it's like that Snickers commercial. You're not always you when you're hungry. We probably all can remember a specific situation when we got a little bit emotional because we were starving. You know, everybody knows that hangry feeling. So that hanger came out and you were not really feeling as in control as maybe you typically would if you were eating on a consistent schedule. So I know for myself, if I get hangry, it's not a good situation. I have built the discipline to be able to say to myself, hey, there's a pizza over there, but that doesn't align with my goals, so I'm not going to have that. But for somebody who isn't where I'm at and who hasn't taken over a decade to build discipline with my nutrition, then it's going to be really difficult for somebody who's very hangry to fight the temptation. And if you're constantly giving into those things, again, you're breaking promises to yourself, which is going to allow you to lose belief and lose confidence in yourself. But of course, if you constantly give in to stress eating, you're constantly overeating, and it's really, really difficult to reach any sort of a fitness goal if you're constantly over-consuming calories. You know, we're more likely to binge or reach for foods that we know aren't serving our goals and aren't allowing our body to feel its best when we're hangry. Because those Oreos that are sitting in the cabinet look really, really, really tasty when we're hungry and emotional. Now, we can prevent this all from happening with a few different strategies. Number one, you can plan out and schedule your meals. So if you're eating smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day, then when a craving hits, you can say, oh, well, I have this meal prep, I can heat it up, or I have this protein-rich snack that I can have. You know, and this is going to make it a lot easier for you to overcome that craving than if you had nothing prepared. You're more likely to be like, oh no, I need something now, and then go for whatever is in front of you, which in today's day and age, usually there's not a beautiful dish of chicken, broccoli, and rice sitting in front of you. It's usually cookies from the vending machine or pizza from the break room. So when we don't have a plan, it makes it much, much easier for you to give into those cravings since you have no other option. So maybe it's been 4 or 5 hours since you've had a meal, and now it's been a stressful day at work, and you have nothing prepared at home for dinner. So you stop at the drive-thru instead of going home to something that you've already prepped. Now, if you haven't gone that long without eating, and if you had something ready to go at home, that stress eating or that emotional eating wouldn't be a problem in that situation. The second thing you can do is make sure you're hitting your protein goal. Now, protein is so important for so many different things: muscle, metabolism, aging, longevity, preventing chronic illness. It helps us to build muscle, and muscle is the organ of longevity. But protein also helps to keep you more full and satiated and does reduce cravings because it helps to keep blood sugar more stable. So I always recommend to eat 1 gram per pound of your body weight in protein every day. Some people might do more, some people slightly less. You can get away with doing 0.8. But for the majority of people, 1 gram just works. So not only is protein going to help you with your fat loss and muscle gaining goals, but like I said before, protein is the most satiating macronutrient, more satiating than carbs and fats, so it's going to help you stay full for longer periods of time. And if you're more full, you're less likely to have these cravings and you're less likely to give into that stress eating. I know that a lot of you, when you first started eating more protein, because I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are into nutrition or fitness or they're on some sort of a journey. I know that when you first started eating more protein, you probably complained about how full you were and how difficult it was to eat. So if you eat your protein, your cravings are going to decrease. And you can also use this tactic with fiber and fruits and vegetables because those are more voluminous foods that are also going to keep you more full. Another thing is water. Water is going to fill you up, but it's also going to keep you hydrated to keep your body, your cells, and your metabolism operating more efficiently. And usually if you're drinking a lot of water, you're less likely to experience these cravings that could trigger stress eating. In fact, I'm sure you heard it before, but a lot of times people actually mistake being thirsty for being hungry. So if you're constantly hydrating, then you're going to have less of these cravings. So if you are in a moment where you are craving something and you're about to give into some emotional eating pattern, breathe, stop, chug some water, and I bet that that's going to make a difference. The last thing you can do here, and this one I feel like not a lot of people think about, is you can use low-calorie food options to kind of keep your mouth busy. So I lean on gum a lot in this situation. I love 5 peppermint gum. It is the only gum that I will chew, and I love it. So sometimes cravings can pop up because we're bored. Chewing gum can help, using carbonated water can help, or you can even use pickles and carrots since they're lower in calories. But if you are using these tactics and you're on a fitness journey, please make sure to track anything that does have calories in them so you can manage it. So when it comes to stress eating and emotional eating, the biggest thing that you need to remember is that there is always a trigger, there is always a reason. These things don't happen by accident. But on top of that, you need to understand that no matter what, you are always in control of what you do or do not put in your body. Nobody is stuffing Oreo cookies down your face. You are making the choice to put them into your mouth. And we are all adults here. You can overcome this. If you've found any value from this episode of the podcast, please share it with at least one person. Share it on your social media, bring people in, share the message, and let's help one person get better together. Now, what I need you to do is I need you to go out today and do one thing that's going to take you one step closer to where you want to be.